What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be ranking the Baldur's Gate 3 companions, 1 through 10. We're going to be looking at some of the things I liked about them, some of the things I didn't like, and why exactly I have them in the spots I do. This is going to be from the position of not being the origin run. It's going to be from being the making your own Tav in the game. Starting at number 10, we're going to have Minsk. Um, he doesn't really have a big aspect on the story and the game itself. I do think it's kind of cool he's a ranger, because there's not a lot of, none of the characters really, are rangers, and I don't, he definitely gives ranger vibes, and I don't think any other character in the game really does, maybe a little bit, but him himself, I don't really think, he doesn't really have a big impact on the story. He's probably more of just a fan service character for people that play the older games, which I haven't yet. I do plan on playing them eventually. I do have them, and I do want to play them, but as of now, I haven't, and for me, he just doesn't have a big impact on the story of the games. I did, exhaust his dialogue. I've played as him a little bit, but I think he's a ranger. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, as of now, he's sitting at the bottom. Next is Jaheira. Not a big surprise. Those two are definitely most people's least favorite. I don't have a problem with them. I like them. I do kind of like how she's old and she's still, strong and tough, and she gives really like hardcore grandma vibes. But overall, she just she definitely does have impact on the story, and there is some, she's got a lot of, I think, more content in Act 3 than anything. I don't dislike her, but there's just so many more good options, and you do get her a lot later, and that was another thing with Minsk, is you get him so late into the game, it's kind of hard to really incorporate him to your playthrough that you already have. And then, like I said before, I didn't play the previous games. I know she was in the previous games, and we already get a druid as well, so her being another druid just, I don't know. Um, Halson, Halson's gonna be at number 8. I do like Halson. Um, I kind of like how he kind of had that thing where he doesn't really think he should be a leader. How he's leader of the druids, but he doesn't really know. I do kind of like that. I think that's a character theme that we don't really see too often. But other than that, Halson, he definitely has more of an impact on the story. But I don't really know. I mean, he's a good character. It's just all the other characters have a lot more depth, and he's kind of just there, for you know the later acts. I feel like after the first act, and he does have that one storyline in Act 2, but overall he's not bad, and I do like. I think he's got a good introduction with being the bear. I kind of figured that out when I saw the bear. I thought it was him, but I know some people that didn't, and they actually accidentally killed him. I think it's a very good introduction, and I do like him as a character. And there are a lot of fun theories about his bear form, and that he's actually a bear that turns into a human, which I think is very interesting. But yeah. So I don't dislike Howson, but he's just, there's a lot better options. Next is Minthara, and that's gonna be a little controversial. But I haven't really done too many evil playthroughs. I've definitely done a lot of playthroughs. I'd say probably have about like 3 to 4 completed ones, like ones where I've gotten far in Act 3, and then I've got probably around at least 10 ones that I've gotten, Act 1, Act 2, maybe even Act 3. But not many of them are evil. With Minthara, I do kind of like how she is unique to an evil playthrough, but I also kind of wish I could get her in one. I don't know. I do want to do an evil playthrough, and I do want to have her as a companion. I did wish they did more for her to be redeem herself, because I know now, I don't know if they took it out or not, or even if they added it in on purpose, but I know there is a way to like knock her unconscious, and then when you see her at Moonrise Towers, you can recruit her. I do think that's interesting. And I think it's also interesting that she's a paladin. I'm pretty sure she's a paladin. I think that's very interesting. But as of now, she's at number 7, and then next we're going to be getting to the really good ones. So number 6, I have Will. I know they changed a lot about Will before he came out, like right before the game came out. They changed a lot about Will's character. Um, I do think it was interesting that he was a warlock. Now I don't know that much about D&D lore, but I do know that warlocks, they have some type of pack. So I knew they were a little like, warlocks were a little shady. They have a little bit of weird business going on. So when I found out he was a warlock, I was a little interested in what his storyline would be. He does have, I think, a decent amount of impact on the story, which I do enjoy. And I kind of like the arc when him discovering that like morality, it isn't all black and white. It's a little gray sometimes, and not everything is just good or bad. Some people are, you know, in the middle. I think it's very interesting because the storyline is kind of like, he's a good guy, but then he has to do this bad thing. He has to make this pact to save his city, and so it's definitely interesting. And I think it's and I kind of just like his character. He's got the fake eye, and he's a little charismatic, and he's very heroic, and he kind of thinks he's like the main character. I think it's very interesting, and especially if I ever did an origin playthrough, I think it might be with him because I just think it's interesting the way he is. But I kind of want to do an origin playthrough with everybody. Number five is Gale. I think Gale's very interesting because when I first met him, he kind of gives like older vibes, like he's almost got some wisdom, and being a wizard, he does have some wisdom, and he's also kind of charming. He's got good charisma. But he's also being kind of manipulated in a way. He's being manipulated by um the goddess, that he was laying in bed with, and it's just a little interesting because you didn't really expect at first. But Mistra is kind of like not necessarily like manipulating him. Well, I don't know. I don't want to use the word manipulate, but I just think it's interesting. I also think it's interesting. He's kind of got like this pride versus humility thing kind of going on. He's kind of like the pride of being one of the best witches ever, and you know, being a lover to a goddess, but at the same time now he has to eat magical items just to survive. It's very interesting, and it goes a lot deeper than that. I think it's cool how he has this intelligence, but he's also kind of self-sacrificing, and he's willing to kind of blow himself up to, you know, further the plot, further the story, and even destroy evil, which I think is interesting because I think he's not necessarily evil, but he's a little more self-serving. But then in the end, he kind of, changes his ways. And that depends on how you play as him, if you play it as him, or if how you interact with him. It's very interesting. And then, in the return camp in the end of the game, it's very interesting when you meet him and how his story ended up. And then next is Historian. I think Historian is very evil. I still haven't really done his whole storyline yet, and I really want to. I'm going to in my next playthrough, but I do know a lot about him. I've seen a lot of media about him and a lot of content, and I do think he's a very interesting character. And I really like how, you kind of do evil things, not necessarily evil, but kind of like funny, you know, kind of cruel things and like selfish things, and that's kind of he likes that. But I actually heard that like those things you do, they don't add a lot of points to him liking you. And then the further you get and the more autonomy you give him, he gets a lot more closer to you and he likes you a lot more. And I think that's very interesting because his approval to you letting him make his own decisions is a lot higher than his approval to you doing something evil. And I think it's a very good portrayal of trauma and kind of not knowing how to, survive and not knowing that being good is an option, you know. Um, there's drastically different endings with his um, storyline as well. You could be evil, and you could, and if he ascends, and then if he doesn't ascend, and then if you're romancing him, if you're not, if he likes you, if he doesn't, if you gave him autonomy and let him make his own decisions, if you took it away from him, it's just so many different things, and this from starts from the very beginning if you bite him or not, and I think it's a little obvious that he's a vampire, but um, the reveal was pretty nice, and there's a little bit of foreshadowing with that one boar. So yeah, Star ends up for next is Lae'zel. Now Lae'zel, I think she's a very interesting character, and I didn't really like her at first, to be honest, but that's kind of the point, 'cause she's just very off-putting. But then you realize she's only 22, and she's just kind of scared. I thought she was a lot older than that, but no, she's young, and she wants to help us, even if we're not a Gith, she's even willing to help Shadowheart at some points, which is which is just interesting to me because Shadowheart, she doesn't like gifts. She's practically like against it. But the idea of Lae'zel and that she's kind of being indoctrinated into this, I don't want to say, this their religion, their god that they follow, the brutality of their ways and what they do. It's just very interesting, and I love the character development. She might have some of the best character development I've ever seen in gaming. The fact that she turns into a person that's trying to understand how other people feel, that's trying to understand the ways of the world and empathy. Because it seems like their way of life is apathy and not, survival of the fittest, only the strongest survive. And then she kind of transitions into this person that, cares about other people and wants to understand how you feel. I just think it's very interesting. And she's very loyal too. That's always been a theme the entire playthrough. She doesn't change that at all. She only gets more and more loyal as the game goes on. But her character development, and then she goes from being, just completely blunt to being kind of understanding how her words affect people. And she just wants to understand. She wants to try. And even if you don't romance her or you don't try to change her, she still sees you as a friend, or sees you as a warrior. And she's got a very interesting ending with the astral plane and just everything that goes on with her. Number two is Karlach. Obviously, everybody loves Karlach. She's just so positive. I love the positivity she gives off. And, she's kind of the thing like, don't judge a book by its cover, because you get the quest to hunt her down, and then you kind of find out, she's red, she's got horns, she's got a tail, and then you kind of find out she's just a tiefling. She's not a devil, she's not a demon, she's not anything awful. In fact, she's one of the more positive people in the show. And the trauma that she shows, the trauma from fighting in the Blood War, the trauma from being sold by Gortash, it's just very, you know, in a way it's realistic. And her humor is hilarious, and she's just one of those people that don't care. If she was in real life, she'd be like, one of those people that don't care what other people think. She's going to be a positive person, and that's just an amazing way to, look at the world. And the way she looks at the world in the game, I can imagine, if she was in real life. She's just a fun person to have in her party. She's a very fun character to play with as well. Her humor, she's funny. She's probably one of the funniest characters in the game, if not the funniest. And she's just a reliability. She's got so much reliability when it comes to being consistent and being positive and being funny. It's just funny, and she's just a good character. And I know they did add a lot of stuff. I know she was a later addition, but I think they did a good job. She doesn't have the best ending, though. I didn't mind the ending I got in most of my playthroughs, where she goes to Avernus with Will. That was my first one, so that's kind of like my playthrough, and that's kind of what happened. But I don't mind that one. I hope there's more to the story, because you know, there's the playthroughs where she can become a mind flayer, and those are just brutal. Now, Shadowheart is number one. No, it's not just because she's, a goth girl. I really think they did a good job with the writing, and I think it's a little, I don't think a lot of people, I think they kind of overlook it with her religious kind of, I don't want to say trauma. She's got undiscovered trauma, right? And her religious, she relies on her religion for everything. That's like her mission, her goal. It's almost kind of like Lae'zel, where she's kind of being indoctrinated. I think it's very interesting how they foreshadowed Shar being an evil goddess. Now, I didn't know about Shar. I didn't know anything that, I didn't know she was evil. I didn't know, what her deal was. I just thought, the shadow stuff's kind of weird. And I think it's very, interesting. And I also always run Shadowheart because she's a cleric, and, you always need a cleric in your party. Even though you can turn anybody into a cleric, she just definitely gives cleric vibes. But her character development, she was definitely my first romance option, and I just think it's interesting because being a Christian myself, I kind of understand how I was able to relate to her a little bit, because she thinks we're gonna think she's crazy because of these extreme things she does for her religion, but I kind of understood it, so I didn't think she was crazy. I kind of understood where she was coming from and why she was doing what she did. So I thought it was very interesting. There was definitely some foreshadowing, that thing that was hurting on her hand, and then when you finally complete her storyline, you meet her parents. It all just, I think it wraps up pretty well. And then I just think her as a character, the indoctrination, the trauma, the foreshadowing, I think it all just kind of blends in well. And if you really follow her, you can tell that they did a good job on her and they really tried. So yeah, that's my kind of ranking of all the companions. So number one was Shadowheart, two was Karlach, three was Lae'zel, and then Astarion, four, Gale was five, then Will, Minthara, Halsin, Jaheira, and Minsk. Um, yeah, so if you want me to do an individual video on any of them, I'd be completely fine. Just leave in the comments, what type of videos I should make. If you like this video, if you think I should make more stuff like this, if you think I should change it up, whatever you think I should do, just let me know in the comments. And then, yeah, so I do plan to make more similar content to this, and I did have a fun making this video. So just let me know what you think. If there's any suggestions for my videos, if you like the video. If you want to see more content like this, subscribe. And yeah, I hope everybody has a good day.